Two major powers, one disputed Himalayan border. India and China blame each other for confrontations over the past month. But why is this happening now? And could the tension trigger a military conflict? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Bernard Smith. Trouble is brewing at the roof of the world. India and China both claim territory along the Himalayas, the world's tallest mountain range. Their border dispute goes back decades, and tension is on the rise again. The Indian military says in the first week of May, Indian and Chinese soldiers scuffled and threw stones at each other in the Pangong Tso Lake and Naku La areas. Chinese state media say Indian troops trespassed on Chinese territory and accuse them of trying to build defence facilities. But India's government says its soldiers stayed on its side. Both sides appear to be bolstering their presence. An Australian security analyst posted these satellite pictures on Twitter last week. They appear to show both sides building more tents and roads within 5 kilometres of the line of actual control which separates the two armies. Diplomatic relations between India and China are deteriorating, as Katrina Yu explains from Beijing.
There's always been a dispute there about the territory, but in recent weeks it's been intensifying between PLA Chinese soldiers and Indian soldiers who disagree over the line of control. And because of this, we've had skirmishes, fistfights. No bullets fired yet, but there is a real fear that these scuffles, as they become more intense, could lead to all-out conflict.
China and India share one of the world's longest unmarked borders. Both have territorial claims on more than 3,500 kilometres of land. A month-long war in 1962 ended without any resolution. And there have been several standoffs since then, the latest in 2017. A year later, the Chinese and Indian leaders held talks to maintain peace in the region. Xi Jinping and Narendra Modi met again in October last year. Let's introduce our guests. In New Delhi, we have Brahma Chileni, an author and professor of strategic studies at the Centre for Policy Research. He's a former advisor to India's National Security Council. In the German city of Leipzig, Adam Nie, a specialist on China's foreign policy and security issues. And in Bloomington, Indiana, Sumit Ganguly, a distinguished professor of political science at Indiana University, Bloomington. He's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Welcome to you all. Brahma, I'll begin with you. After all this time, why now these flare-ups along this border?
It's a good question. President Xi Jinping believes that the pandemic is an opportunity for China to expand its influence. In fact, he told a university audience recently that great steps in history have always emerged from the crucible of major disasters. So we see Xi Jinping expanding his agenda, trying to decimate Hong Kong's local autonomy. He has made moves in the South China Sea, including setting up 2 new administrative districts. The Chinese Coast Guard last month rammed and sank a Vietnamese fishing boat, and now we are seeing border flare-ups with India. So what's happening on the Himalayan frontier needs to be seen in the broader context in which Xi Jinping is advancing his expansionist agenda at a time when the world is grappling with the China-originating pandemic.
Adam, is that what it is? China thinks the world's attention has been diverted and it is seeking to establish strength along the Himalayan-Indian border?
Yeah, I would certainly disagree with that. I think both India and China are both have been heavily affected by the pandemic so far, and both have an interest in maintaining peace while they tackle domestic challenges, and especially so Beijing, given that Beijing has plenty of challenges to deal with in Hong Kong, Xinjiang, economic recovery, as well as its important relationship with the US, which has taken a very confrontational turn, and just to name a few. So it doesn't need another confrontation at this point in time. But at the same time, I think the leaders in Beijing doesn't want to appear weak if this was to escalate, especially at a time where the domestic public is anxious about China's near-term future. I think it's certainly true that we need to see this in the wider sweep of Chinese strategic thinking and ambitions. But I would just like to point out that there's a lack of clarity on exactly what has happened up to this point, given that media reports have so far been uncollaborated by official sources. And it's really fueling speculation on what has happened. So we're not exactly sure what happened yet, so let's not jump to a conclusion.
Sumit, why do you think we're hearing more reports of confrontations up there along the Himalaya borders between India and China? Why now?
I largely think because the Chinese have taken a more assertive posture and are probably probing India's capabilities and resolve along the border. This is something that has actually been going on for the last several years. In fact, I would trace this back to 2014 when Xi Jinping visited India, and in the midst of that visit, there were a series of incursions that took place. And it's hard for me to believe that a local commander would have taken the initiative to undertake incursions while the president was visiting in India. That really stretches the imagination to a breaking point. So there is actually a pattern of incursions, and this is the latest thereof. And I think it has much to do with China feeling the frustration of the global community with its very opaque handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. And at a moment also when India is sort of fitfully moving closer to the United States. And this is clearly a message from Beijing saying that, we can create troubles for you along the border if you try to cozy up to the United States.
Brahma, there have been confrontations up there before. We've seen fists thrown between both sides, but they've always calmed down in the past. Why would it not calm down this time?
Because what's happening now is far more serious than what we have seen in many years. In fact, it's not just one incursion. Shamit was mentioning the 2014 incursion when President Xi Jinping arrived in New Delhi. He came with this encroachment. Now we have several incursions that have happened in the northern Ladakh region, at least 4 standoffs as of today between Chinese and Indian troops, because the Chinese have entered up to 3 kilometers beyond the line of control. So we have confrontations at several points. And therefore, de-escalating all these different confrontations will require the political leadership, both in Beijing and in New Delhi, to be able to engage and sort matters out. And given the pressure that President Xi faces, he's playing the nationalist card at home. He doesn't want to be seen as weak. He has upped the ante vis-a-vis several of its neighbors, including countries in Southeast Asia. For example, ramming and sinking a Vietnamese fishing boat. And Vietnam is a friendly neighbor of China. That was one example of several in recent weeks where China has utilized the pandemic to assert itself. But what is happening along the China-India frontier is a very serious situation that can potentially go out of control if things do not calm down.
Adam, you can see why from the Indian side, India might feel more defensive. It's spending $71 billion on defence last year. China spent $261 billion on defence. But these situations have calmed down up there in the past. Could this escalate, do you think?
There's certainly a possibility that